why is it so looked down upon when younger women sleep with a lot of men versus younger men sleeping with a lot of women?
It's an interesting question.
Is there any science or research that shows how it can harm one of the other genders more or less?
Well, I'll talk about that because a lot of guys say, oh, and this is just wishful thinking. It's kind of a little bit of coping and seething. It's people saying like, oh, men can do whatever they want sexually and it doesn't mean anything, but women have to, be chaste and pure. And it's like almost every study that I'm aware of that shows a negative association between promiscuity and relationship outcomes shows the same results in men, right? I'm not saying that there's no studies that show one gender or the other, but in general, if you look at a set of married people and try to find like, oh, does body count predict marital satisfaction or
divorce rates
or infidelity, right? Generally, it's like, oh, the effect is found in women and men. So why is it more stigmatized in women versus men in the American West? It does in America and in the West more generally, I'd say. Kind of an interesting question. And then there are other cultures where it's also stigmatized more on one gender versus the other. And generally the stigma does lean towards women, and it's a complicated question. I don't think I'm the right person to answer it because I don't know. But I will note that it's not because it only matters as an indicator for one gender. That's just not true.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay.
It could also, to be frank, it could also be that in these societies, because just as a note, a lot of people think that only men care about this stuff. But when you do surveys and you ask, questions like, what's the ideal body count, right? So I think Steve Stewart Williams did a study on this, and you find that both men and women care about it, right? They both care, right, to an extent.
What is the ideal body count?
It's a moderate number, generally, not zero. There's this kind of, and this is in Western samples, but in their studies, and also I think Alexander from Date Psychology tried to validate this with his Twitter followers, and but the Stuart Williams study, I believe it was UK and US. It might just be UK, I'm not sure, but similar results all around. About average, right? So somewhere in the realm of
what's average?
Somewhere between a few and several is generally what we see in
3 to 7.
Yeah, a few to several, sure.
A few to several.
Yeah, so
okay.
it's
under 10.
People seem
more
to
than
be
one.
Yeah, people seem to discriminate against. And I'm not saying obviously there are some people who fetishize virginity and are very attracted to it, but in general, it seems that men and women are a bit put off by inexperience and really put off by too much experience. So it's like and women discriminate more harshly against inexperience than men, right? And they both discriminate quite harshly against too much experience. So the graph, if I were to graph and by the way, I don't think that anyone should be counting the number of people they sleep with so that way they hit the optimal number, right? This might help people lie more effectively about how many people they've slept with. But if you were to graph, optimal body count, right, in terms of the average person's interests, it would look something like a wave, right, where it's like it starts off like not a huge deal to be a virgin, but not ideal. And then it's like, oh, a few, now we're talking about a, normal, healthy, functioning
someone who's not a loser, but someone,
and someone who has sex.
Right.
Just my type, right? Yeah, exactly. I think that's what people are thinking is like they don't want someone who's, a complete prude. They want someone who has, a full sex drive, some knowledge, right? But then after you get past several, then it's a wave crashing on the shore. It really does. People are put off by it. So to say that women care too, I guess it would be interesting. It's like, well, in most of these cultures where women's sexuality is more strictly controlled than men's and more harshly stigmatized, are cultures where men have all the power, right? And so maybe if women had all the power, they would start becoming very sexually controlling and neurotic about male sexuality.
Interesting.
Right? I'm not sure that they would. I'm not convinced that they would. But we can't run the experiment, right? There's no way of testing that, in a lab that I know of. I mean, maybe some clever researcher is listening and thinking, oh, I've got an idea. But it's clear that women care too, and seemingly to a similar degree, similar-ish anyway. And so it's possible that the reason that we see the stigma is just about who has the power. But again, I'm going to be cautious here and say that there are probably experts on chastity and purity and these concepts who have very fleshed out ideas as to why it's men who are doing this, kind of stigmatizing. But But that would be based on my knowledge. That would be my hypothesis.